Stormwater Abatement Committee, and I'll ask Kathy if she'll call roll, please.
Certainly. Chairman Trimmie.
Here.
Mr. Anderpont. Mr. Collins.
Here.
Mrs. Griffin. Present. Mr. Hassan.
Here.
Mr. Scott.
Here.
And Mr. Stelly. You do have a quorum.
Thank you. I do want to do something that is not normal for a committee meeting. I'm going to ask you, Dennis, if you will. I'd like to have prayer before this meeting for the tragedy that is going on in our world and for our parish as we move forward. Thank you.
Father, we thank you today, Lord, and we humbly just stand before you, and right now we just acknowledge your Son Christ, Father, for all the glory that he's brought upon us, for all the blessings. And Father, right now we ask for a peace and an understanding upon the country of Japan, Father, that you would hover over his people, Lord, that you would continue to keep them safe as the weather is bad there, as they have cold rains, Father, that you would bring them shelter, that you would bring them love and joy, that you would just bring the hearts of those people that are to sow into this country, Father, that you would just bring them to just love, Father, to give whatever it is they can. And we ask that you bless this meeting today, that you continue to just give us wisdom and guidance in all we do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Dennis. Our item on our agenda is to receive the report and the recommendations from our staff regarding the content of the residential solid waste collection and disposal request and disposal request for proposal document. And I'm going to ask Brian if he would give us an introduction on this. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Ms. Trimmie. Tonight, following your calendar that's been approved for the solid waste RFP process, we are presenting to you the recommendations from staff as to the main elements of the RFP and for your consideration between now and the next meeting, which would be March the 31st. The timing on this and the action on the 31st really depends on what comes out of this meeting and the evaluation period. And I think beyond that, we don't need to plan the following. It really depends. But just as a refresher, a lot of what goes into an RFP, a request for proposals, is fairly boilerplate. So these items tonight are the main things that you as committee and policymakers and ultimately the full jury will need to approve to go in the document before we would send it out and seek proposals. And this is for house-to-house collection in wards 2 through 8. And we also do have a part of this that addresses Ward 1, and Alan will explain that. But Alan will go through the different items, and, of course, whatever questions or comments we have after that, we'll go from there.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Ms. Trimmie. Like Brian said, we converted most of the slides that you would have seen at the last meeting to really recommendations. Last time they were kind of key questions, and now they're our recommendations. So I'll just kind of go through them, try and give a brief explanation on the ones I think are needed. Some of them are pretty self-explanatory. At the end, I guess we can come back and discuss any one that you'd like to. Under the scope of work terms, we're recommending that we utilize a single contractor for the unincorporated areas of Ward 1, 2 through 8, I'm sorry. That's just like your current contract is set up. It's at one base price. And that's pretty much keeping in sync with exactly what we're doing or have been doing for several years. The second item under that bullet would be what we call a term Ward 1 inclusion. What we're recommending is that as part of the language in the RFP that the contractor that's selected would be required to serve the Ward 1 area at that same exact base rate that they would be serving the rest of the wards 2 through 8. That's pretty much what's been negotiated to this point. In addition to that base rate, and the base rate for wards 2 through 8, as well as the base rate for ward 1, we will have language in there for a CPI adjustment on an annual basis, it's a consumer price index, basically a cost of living type increase. We would also, like what's currently being practiced, have a fuel adjustment on a monthly basis. And what happens in that is each month, each year annually, a base rate is established for the fuel. And each month, we check against that base rate, and if it goes up significantly, there's provisions to increase the rate that's paid per household. If it goes down, there's provisions to reduce that rate. So it fluctuates, and it really tries to track and pay for the cost of fuel. Our fuel prices, it's not something that was in some of the original contracts, but fuel prices have been so volatile over the last couple of years. It's something to help protect really the contractor and everyone else in a long-term contract like this, so that there's no surprises. There's also, for the Ward 1 area, simply because the contractor will be required to do the billing for that service, we will provide for a surcharge adjustment in the Ward 1 area. We'll allow the contractor to charge a surcharge for administrative handling of those accounts. We're proposing to recommend that amount be capped at 10% of the base rate. If you look at our numbers, or just pick an average number for the base rate at $18, let's just do $20 for simple math. That would cap that at no more than about $2 per household on a monthly basis for a surcharge for administrative fees. There is an administrative fee. We recognize that. We're trying to provide the contractor with a means to recoup their cost in the Ward 1 area. Remember, in wards 2 through 8, they get to send one bill to the parish. We pay that. There's really not that much administration to do it. So that's why they're handled separately. Level of service recommendations. I'm going to come back to this bullet. The containers per household is one of the things that we feel is important to discuss with you. The very next slide lays out our current contract and proposal. So I'm going to come back to that one in just a minute. Community services. This is something that we have debated a lot as a staff on how to handle. We have a significant contract that we're going to let for solid waste services. We feel like it would be prudent to include an aspect in our contract whereby we solicit in these proposals from the contractors those community services that they normally and typically provide to other communities. In my mind, I am thinking of trash bashes, educational campaigns, things like that, that some companies choose as part of their culture to really embrace their communities. We wanted to build an aspect of this contract where they could provide that to us. Remember, we're accepting a proposal of their services, not necessarily a bid or base price. So it's okay for them to propose to do other things for us. There's more in the further slides talk about community services. It'll come a little clearer as we go through this. Contract terms. We're proposing 5 years, the initial term, with a maximum of 5 years with a 5-year renewal. Our basis for that is simply trying to allow the contractors who may or may not have to make a substantial investment to manage your contract an adequate time to recoup their cost. If we put this, be my suggestion, if you put this at a real short term, you're asking those guys to really load up your price on the front end to recoup their cost. If you put it at a really long term, maybe you don't get the advantage of renewals and renegotiation as quick as possible. This is a part where we're really going to need your input. I've already mentioned it a couple times or one time, but the part of the contract terms will be a CPI adjustment, a monthly fuel adjustment, and liquidated damages for things like an early start, late finish, a failure to collect on a can, or missing a route. So we have things in there to basically levy fees or fines for failures. Almost every one of these comes as a second chance, as we have it currently worded, where we would send, if we had a problem, we would either get on the phone and document it with the letter that says, hey, look, we're having a problem in a certain area. We need that fixed. If that happens, great, there's no problem. If it doesn't happen, you have to have some sort of liquidated damage to more or less enforce the service that you're asking for. So I can get you specifics or answer any questions about those, but we have that built in to the contract terms at this point. I'm going to go to the next slide. The next slide goes back again to containers per household. I think this is a big question. We heard a lot and a number of people speaking here and several of yours. You know, we don't want to cut our service. I think that's the key ingredient. That's the balance we're trying to strike. To be fair with everyone, our current contractor has been really lenient with his service. They've been where this comes into play is we have not limited how many cans really that you can use. We've run by most of these rules. If you look at this table, currently in your current contract, everyone gets a can or container, the first one, for free. Same thing for the new contract. Currently, if you need a second can or a third can, you have to pay for the price of that can. And then the service is ultimately for free. I'm going to say for free. We all know it's being paid for by sales tax. But for the purpose of this discussion, we'll say no direct cost to the resident. In the proposal, we're suggesting that's a little too open-ended to ask these contractors to bid on or propose on. So what we're suggesting is, again, the second can and subsequent cans would be handled the same way. Direct cost to the customer, paid directly to the contractor. For pickup purposes, for curbside pickup purposes, right now, they pretty much pick up however many cans you have out there. In the proposal, as we have it right now, it would be for more than one container, more than two containers, there would be an additional service charge for pickup, direct to the customer, direct to the contractor. We would propose to limit that at, wait a second, help me here, Brian, on that one. We're proposing to limit that at no more than the current price of the, what would be the base rate. That
Correct.
correct. Make sure I had it right there for a second. That's what we're proposing. Again, that's our starting point. That's why we're here to meet and discuss these items. Let me go to the next slide. Probably the most critical aspect of any RFP is how you're going to evaluate it. This format of a certain amount of points, 100 points, major categories, and how those points are going to be awarded is really standard for RFPs. Where the discussion comes in is how many points do you apply to certain categories. Remember, or we're proposing, this is a request for proposals. The very last line on this slide is cost of services, and you can see that's 25 points. So roughly 25% of the weighting for the criteria will be on cost. The rest of the 75% breaks down along the categories that we have there. The main categories, background and experience. We're going to be asking for up to for 5 years minimum experience. We want to see how these guys have done, or these companies have done in business, who they're doing business with. We want a list of their Louisiana contracts. We need to know that they are, looking backwards, have successfully performed contracts, size and scale and character. We have a special character here in Calcasieu Parish. We're very wide very, very large parish where you have to cover a lot of territory. So we want to know that they have handled similar contracts for enough time to show that they've been successful. We're going to want to talk to those other parishes, cities, municipalities, agencies, to see how that service has gone. We're making one of our most important decisions financially, and we need to make sure we get it right. Ability to perform is another 25-point criteria. And what we're going to be looking for there is more on the financial side of the company. Do they have the capital to manage this kind of contract? The type of numbers that we're talking about, you need a lot of money to run that kind of operation. Are they in good standing with the state of Louisiana? For any number of, I think the Secretary of State's office is the place you go to determine that. But we want to check all that out. There's forms, certificates, documents that they'll have to provide to us so that we can assure that they're in good standing as a company. How much credit do they have? The financials on a company like this, and we're going to have Mr. Milner on our team when we're evaluating this. The financials are very important so that we know that 1 year, 6 months, whenever, we're not dealing with a company that's not going to make it and put ourselves in a bind for having to transition to another company and another company and another company. I think we should all assume that if there's a transition, the transition is going to bring about a lot of everywhere else, unless we're very lucky, it usually brings about a lot of questions, a lot of problems. It's just startup problems. So we for sure would not want to do that simply because our company didn't have the money or the financial stability to make it through the contract. Equipment, a little less on this particular category at 15 points. We want to know that they either are going to own the right equipment or have the ability to get the right plan where they can acquire enough equipment to service our contract. The trucks that you run the routes with, or they take a while, a lot of lead time to get those trucks and that equipment. So we need to know that they can get it. It goes deeper than just having the equipment. We want to know they're going to have good equipment. We want to know their equipment's well maintained. We want to know that they have safety records. Utilizing that equipment is something that's satisfactory. We want to know they have fleet management policies that is going to continue over the life of the contract, that they will have good, high-quality equipment out there on the roads. The way I see it, they're representing their company, but they're representing Calcasieu Parish Police Jury also. And so the driver, we want nice, reasonably speaking, nice, neat, clean service vehicles out there. I don't think we want, ratty, tore down, broke down trucks that are broke down on the side of the road. I think I'm just trying to paint two extremes there. So in equipment, we're looking for more than just can they get it or do they have it. We want to see how they're using it and their standard practices. Community services is something I mentioned earlier. Again, as you look through the array of options that are used across the communities that I've looked at, you see trash bashes, you see educational campaigns, you see a number of ways where when it's the culture of these companies, they really support their community. It's good for them too. I'm sure they get some benefit out of that. I'm not an expert enough to know what that is, but being a good community partner for this size contract, I think, is a good thing. The details of how that will work out are in the actual document. I think it's important to show that you've got a record of doing those sort of things too. I think it's one thing to come into our proposal and say, I will do all these things. And I think that's, we'll have to believe that people will do that. But I think it's even better when you can stand back and say, I have been doing this in every other community across the state. So we'll see how this part unfolds in the proposals, but just giving you a sense of how it was developed so that you'd have, maybe the right information to ask questions. Cost of services we've already talked about. There's really two items that we're going to ask them for in the cost of service. We're going to ask them for a base rate, what amount of, what are you going to charge per household for basically unlimited solid waste pickup, the limits being the number of amount of trash you can get in those cans that we've talked about earlier. So we're not changing any of those services when it comes to tree limbs or yard waste or white goods or anything like that. For the most part, we have stuck with the contract, the manual, what is your solid waste manual, basically the same things that we've been doing all along in that regard. So the only other thing we will ask for in terms of a price at this point would be the cost of that can. Right now, I don't know, it may range between $60 and $80, but we're going to ask for the cost of the can in this. That way, at least we know what it is, and we'll adjust that as needed. So the evaluation criteria and the point system to use will be critical. This will ultimately be used to decide who to recommend to the committee or to the jury. I'm not sure who how we'll do the actual recommendation. Brian might know the answer to that. The last slide is the who will be evaluating doing that point system. And in working with Brian, and we've sat down and that we've assembled this team of our directors, and I've worked with obviously everyone on this team, and I think we're just going to look for a very unbiased, take home the proposals, do your homework, research it. We'll come together and ultimately score out the score sheets and try and make the best decision that we can for Calcasieu Parish. We will utilize our staffs to analyze or dissect any of the things that we get in those proposals that we need to. But ultimately, I think this team, unless it's changed, will be the ones making the recommendation to you at the end of the process. So, goals for next meeting are looking forward a little bit, and I know we'll stop and probably take some questions, but just the next time, we would be looking to take action, the appropriate action on the RFP. If everything you heard and goes well tonight and it's pretty simple, we may find ourselves at the March 31st meeting really ready to take more or less final actions or close to it. If we need more review time, we still have some time in the process to pull it off. So with that, I'll start to take any questions. Let me make one last comment that I might not have made enough comments about last time. Your RFP and your contract refers back to the Solid Waste Management Manual. The decisions we make right here really reflect a lot of the changes that need to be made in your manual. Last time I think the manual was revised, was 2007. So there's a few terms in there that are a little obsolete, but by and large, the things that need changing are concepts like term of contract, like we've talked about, liquidated damages, and rates like that. So we'll have to, in this process, adopt a new manual, an updated manual, right before we send out the proposals, because obviously we're going to want our proposers to base their proposals on the latest edition of the solid waste manual. So we have it. We have all the areas that need to be modified. It's really not that much in a 35-page document, but we need to present that and show you the actual changes so that they're approved right before it goes out. So that's part of this process, and I just wanted to point that out. With that, any questions?
Just hang in there, okay? And Mr. Hassan, you have your first question.
Thank you. According to the solid waste manual right now, how many containers are there supposed to be picking up?
According to this, it's not limited right now.
It's not limited.
Just really says that the resident has to buy additional cans beyond one.
In my opinion, if we limit the number of containers that they can put out, we're decreasing the service. We put this on the ballot to continue the level of service that they were receiving. We cannot decrease that service one bit. Go ahead.
Let me try to address that. Alan's correct in his answer. The background on this is helpful. The original contract, or the original RFP, for waste collection in the parish was in 1992, after the first passage. At that time, one 96-gallon can, to be honest, I don't know that nobody conceived, but it was not thought that there would ever be a situation where somebody would need more than one of those. And I can remember those days back when those old galvanized cans were around. So a lot has changed in 20 years with packaging of things and so forth. And over the years, it has been absorbed in that to where we estimate about half, working with the contractor and the information, half of the residents, give or take, utilize 2 cans. There was never a solid, hey, you got to stop at 2. The intent was 1. And then we don't have as great a feel. We estimate maybe 10% roughly would have 3. But this was a very key point. I would argue that it is not a reduction in service, because we know that's critical for you. If you
But
look,
we're going to charge if they have a third one.
that's correct. But the reason we want to recommend 2, there's a lot, and for many people, it's actually an increase. There are a lot of people who still use 1 can who can get up to 2. Now, that's currently in the contract, but this would actually guarantee that. So we're striking that balance. The reason we feel like 2 is a good balance is because if you require up to 3, which only, again, it's an estimate, but only 10% of the total have it, it's going to force the bidders, though, to account for the fact that they may have to provide up to 3, and it's going to increase the bid prices. So we felt like it was a good balance, and it is 2 full-size cans really are very common. We got contracts from all over the state, RFPs, in addition to our own experience. I don't think we found one that had any can allowances above 2. Some were 1, some were 2, nothing else. Our interpretation of what would be serviced is if somebody had 2 cans, it's not uncommon to have a couple of bags put to the side. Usually it's for non-kitchen garbage. You know, we want to be lenient on that. We don't want kitchen garbage all around it, because maybe dogs get into it and it gets littered. But to have 2 cans versus 3 is a pretty big step up. And so we didn't want to disallow, however, the option for a resident to have a 3rd can at their own cost, because they are going to be coming through the neighborhood. And it is a pricing mechanism, just like many other things in the economy. So we felt like that was a fair balance.
Yeah, and if I could comment on that, I agree with Brian. Number one, as we reviewed a number of other places, Sulphur, for instance, where we understand about their service at least. What would be the 3rd can, you pay the additional full base rate again. What would be the 4th can, you pay the additional full base rate again. So that number actually can add up quite fast. It ranges from that kind of approach to, say, Baton Rouge, which I understand is 2, period. No additional changes here. So it generally stops at about 2. It generally starts costing directly to the customer at 2. But if you surveyed every last contract, and I'm sure the guys that are here tonight have seen all kinds of contracts, but that's the rules of thumb that we've seen. Remember, too, or I would remind you that we're providing collection centers for excess trash on any given day or week or any time. And our contract allows for what Brian says, the extra waste on holidays or you have something at your house, to be properly bagged so that it doesn't get strewn around the neighborhood, to be placed there by the can. Our current contract would have our contractor pick that up, and we would continue that. But to take the whole nother next step to really open the door up for a third can at home, I think is an additional service that we would be, I think there would be an opportunity there for the rates to change significantly higher.
I guess I don't agree at all with the fact that they can put 2 cans out, but put 5 bags on the side of it that we're going to take a chance of getting, trash everywhere. I'd rather see them purchase the additional can as they do now. I have no problem with the purchasing of the additional can, which, by the way, doesn't necessarily have to be from the contractor. It can be from Lowe's or Home Depot or any hardware store. That's what's currently being done. There's several people that have additional cans that they've purchased elsewhere.
And I would tell you that's not the way the contract is worded or would be worded. It may be practiced, but that's just not.
But what my point is, the people of our parish are being provided a service that they expect to continue under this new contract. That's what they voted on, and that's what we promised. I can't agree on doing this is just me personally, I can't agree on doing anything that's going to lower that level of service, or we're going to put an extra charge on them for household waste.
I would answer Mr. Hassan. In my view, you're saying that the 90% who don't use 3 cans, give or take a percentage, are paying for the 10 that would. So if we took what we believed was a lot closer percentage to what do most people have. I mean, I think if it had been in the contract specifically and foreseen, it probably would have said 1. Well, we weren't going to recommend to you 1 because if half of the people are getting 2, then I totally agree with you. That would be viewed as a decrease in service. But you're transferring to vast majority of the taxpayers on that for the handful that have 3. And again, we're not saying you couldn't pick it up, but it would be an extra cost because otherwise, if there would be a built-in incentive for people with 1 or even 2 cans to go ahead and get 3 because you can. And for that reason, we were concerned about the bid prices going up. But that's on the tax. That's the other 90%.
I guess what I'm saying is, you say it's an additional incentive to get a third can. If they have the waste, that doesn't change with or without that incentive. They're still going to put it out to the curb.
People get very good and efficient when they have to go within certain means. We acknowledge that there are going to be some people affected by that, and they might have to get a little more efficient at it. But it's really again, it just comes down to balance with who should pay for those who don't. For those who use 1 or 2 cans.
About how many do you estimate have bought a second can?
About 50%.
How are we going to handle those 50% that own that can if there's a different contractor? Because people have paid for that can, and a new contractor's coming in. How are we going to handle that situation with that? And that's 50% of the whole parish.
You're just talking about the actual cost of the container?
Right.
We haven't got to that level of detail on whether we need to address that. We can address.
That's like a $60, $70 charge that they have incurred sometime in the last 18 years.
I would say I don't know where you draw the line, but unless it's been in the last. Of course, we're still several months away. But if any can over about a year, I don't know how much you depreciate a can. I would say that if somebody bought it 10 years ago, that's pretty much, they've gotten their life out of that. But there may be for some period prior to the new service, if it's a switch, yeah, we could take a look. Maybe anything in 2011. I don't know. That's something we could put down as a consideration.
Okay, I just have a couple other questions, if you don't
Go
mind.
right ahead. Yeah.
You mentioned limbs and white goods. What's the criteria for limbs? What's the criteria for white goods?
Yeah, it's the same criteria that we're working under now. White goods, they will pick that up. You have to put it at the curb, just like right now. That's generally the way it's handled is they identify it on the pass-through, and then they get it collected up in a subsequent route. The trucks that come by the first time don't necessarily take that container. Same process. On the limbs, same criteria as we currently have, the 4-inch in diameter and 6 foot in length, bundled. We didn't propose to change any of that at this point. It's the same criteria we've been working under with the addition to, again, of our centers. I think those people who can't quite handle it through the curb service are going to have an opportunity to bring it to our centers.
Okay, thank you.
That's it? Okay. Mr. Scott?
I'm willing to let anybody else go first if there's other people. I'm good. All right, Alan. Couple quick questions.
Hang on.
Let's do some history right quick. How many households are we talking about, first of all, that we're going to be serving here?
I think our penciled in our numbers from the census data. It's a little above 30,000. That's our.
Well, that would include Ward.
Yeah, I was going to say.
More like 25.
Yeah. So it starts at that, and you can take out Ward 1.
And you talked a little about one service. Now, we don't have to do much discussion on it, but is there a reason that we haven't at least looked into splitting, since we are a wide parish? Have you had discussion on splitting west-east side, two different?
We have, and give it a fair discussion, and without pointing out all the pros and cons, I think we end up that the best possible economies of scale will be received for all accounts. We're talking about price, our administrative issues we deal with here, keeping a consistent level of service across the parish. It all brings you back to one contractor.
We're going to go back to the containers so right now, I'm just a homeowner. I have 2 cans, but I also have a couple small of these Lowe's cans or whatever, just small ones that I put other trash in to make it easier for them to pick up trash. Am I going to be affected in the way that, am I going to be charged any extra money right now? Because right now, the 2 extra cans besides the 2 that I have are picked up without any problem, and if I put a few sticks beside that and a box beside that, how is this going to affect me with the new contract?
Well, and again, I preface all this. We've all enjoyed the service that we've had for 18 years, and it is that service. You know what that service is. The way the contract, and again, if we change contractors, we may get a better contractor. We may not. We don't know at this point. We would be back to dealing with the contract terms, which says, 2 cans, however many cans we decide. Then it must be properly bagged so that not to be strewn or littered throughout the neighborhood before they can get there to pick it up. But we would be asking them to pick it up. If the contractor that comes in ultimately is selected, has certain equipment that they're using that doesn't allow for that, for instance, the automatic loaders, much harder to provide that level of service if you use that kind of truck. So a lot of things will play into what the next level of service is, especially if there's a transition.
Now, we're going to get into that level of service. Over the years, I've watched the current provider go from one automated truck coming through the neighborhood, another truck coming through the neighborhood, man picking it up, to now just a truck coming through and doing it all at one time. Mm-hmm. Are we going to consider this in the level of service? Because I would like to know, I would rather have one truck coming through the neighborhood, manned, doing it all the right way, because when it's automated and trash hits the ground, they don't have to pick it up. So I would like for that to be very much a thought in this. What are they actually going to do when they're picking up trash?
And I agree with you. We have decided not to, and we're sticking with the same exact manual criteria that you've already had, to not require a certain truck or equipment used. We're going to allow them to propose how they want to do it, and with that, they know the services we've been getting as well as we do. Also, we'll be able to evaluate that in that equipment line. We'll be able to evaluate that in that ability to perform. You'll be able to reflect those things in that choice there. I think it's, rather than trying to say you have to use truck X in a certain way with a certain amount of people, it's just too much detail to time down to each one of these companies. I would say, if they were up here, would say they have a good way of doing it, a very efficient way of doing it, and they can provide the service. So I guess I didn't want to get in a position of limiting them without that being necessary. But obviously we're in a position to get to choose through the evaluation process also.
I hate to disagree, but when you say detail, we're talking millions here. And details are going to be very important. And I don't want to, I'm going to agree with Mr. Hassan. I don't want to back up. If I known we were going to lose anything, then I might have thought different before we, with the way I voted or didn't vote them. But I don't want to lose the service we have. I don't think people want to lose the service. And I understand things change, so we do have to be good stewards of the money. However, this is where we are today. So, the details, sometimes we might need to be a little more detailed in some of these areas to protect the service that is there. Now I'm going to get into your criteria points. So when you take in these RFPs and you sit down individually and you go look at it yourself.
I was going to try and get Tom to bring it back up on the screen.
When you start individually looking at this, you're going to take it and you're going to sit down and look at it. Or these points, say 25 points for background and experience. You're going to pick a number, say you only give them a 22. Is that what you're going to do? Or they get a 25 peer? I mean, how is that number going to be picked?
I can tell you, having done many of these throughout the career, everyone who grades something like this does it slightly different. I have the way that I do it. Brian has the way that he does it. Some people grade hard. Some people grade. I think Ms. Griffin, being a teacher, might recognize what I'm talking about. So everybody does it a little different. In the end, what happens is we all do our research, we do our thoughts, and we come together as a team and we work this out. So there'll really only be one grading at the end of the day done. We'll have our ideas in mind, but again, I may be someone who grades real hard, real low. When I go into the working meeting to decide how we're going to put the points on the paper, I will hear comments from everyone on the team, and I may adjust what I thought. I may have not caught or picked up on something at that point. So as a team, we will pick a point value here. We don't pin ourselves down to just 5-point increments. I don't think we would ever end up with decimals in this situation, but it's the system that's traditionally used or used throughout the country, this point system, and I've seen it come out a number of ways. If we end up at 70 points and selecting a company at 70 points, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad company. They might be outstanding. So you can't get too caught up in the number values. It's ultimately who's going to win.
So you won't basically, let's see, you got 80 y'all, how many?
Can I just add, while you're looking at that, Dennis, I think it's important to combine the slide that's up on the screen with the next one, which I think you're going to ask, Dennis, and that is who's on the team. And it's by design that we put people, in this case, it's a very important contract, so my involvement as well as Dane's we felt was important. So you have administrative folks, you've got the director and assistant director of public works, which is over solid waste. They deal with this on a daily basis. We've got the finance director on there for that side. And then Tarek, we very typically will put somebody on an RFP team that deals pretty much not at all with that issue, but for their analytical skills and sort of just a good thinker who isn't so embroiled in it and may point out things others don't see. So when you get that balance, it really helps adjust any, it's a subjective process to a degree, otherwise you wouldn't need to do this. But it really balances, that word balance is key. Anybody who sees, something 20 versus 18 points, you wouldn't want all public works people, with all due respect to our great staff, you wouldn't want it all public works on there, or a bunch of bean counters like, me and Milner and others. So we feel like that is a part of it, and it's a very important part.
So you wouldn't actually be taking 6, say you went over background and experience, you all turn in your sheet and you take those 6 numbers and take an average and that's the number? You're going to come back and pick a number as a whole?
That's correct. That would be our intent.
We would actually sit down in advance as a group and sort of say, okay, let's cover the ground rules. And this, Alan didn't mention it, but that would be after, too. We really are, we need to maybe fine-tune this, but a presentation by the companies or a short list. If they had 10 companies, we might not want to receive presentations from all. We might want to narrow it down. But here, I think a face-to-face with that short list, or possibly each one of them, if there's not that many, is key. You want that opportunity for a Q&A, and after that, and some good internal debate and discussion, and then, as a group, we put together the scores for each submitter.
So when you say a short list, is this after you put together all these points and you're going to say anybody over 85 total is the short list, or you going to say a short list before we even start?
Right now, we would lean toward, just because I don't know that we would get more than about 5 proposals. I could be way off. If that's the case, we'd rather go ahead and take them all and let them all come and talk. Between now and the next meeting, that would probably be a good thing for us to nail down and discuss with y'all.
All right. And my last note, I will have to go back to the manned, unmanned, only because one of the things that was spoken over and over again during the tax proposition was, do we really want a lot of trucks driving up and down your neighborhood? Well, 2 is more than 1, and that was one of the issues. Did we want that in our neighborhoods, 2 trucks the same week? So I would really look towards that detail and at least try to decide. Details are important, and millions of dollars. I know if I had $1 million, I'd be really detailed. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Ms. Griffin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a good report. I do have some questions. Most of my answers will not be answered, however, until the review panel will come back. I'm interested in how you're going to set the percentage of the fuel adjustment that you talked about. Okay. Is it 3%, 5%? And I know we're going to do this monthly, and then you have a yearly one.
Ms. Griffin,
How
I
do
think
you rationalize?
I think you're going to win the award for the most complicated question tonight. That's for sure. But I'll do my best. What happens is where we're doing it right now. We use CPI indexes, or diesel fuel indexes that are published by the federal government. With that, right now, and what we're proposing to do is the year prior to the year that you're in, we average that price for the year, and we create a base price. So it was the average price for all of last year. And then each month during the current year, we check against that price. And here's where it gets fun. If the price of gas or fuel has significantly gone up more than 20 cents, in 20-cent increments is the way most people do it. I guess the math works out. But at the point where it starts to go much higher, over 20-cent increments, for each 20-cent increment, the base rate of the collection service is raised by 1%. when you do all the math on that, it really works out to that it covers the cost of fuel in some amazing way. So I've looked at those calculations several times. It's really hard to explain. I almost have to do them. We've played with them all week here as we're checking them constantly. But it's all based off of federal indexes that are posted annually, monthly, weekly. So with that, as it goes way up, they get a little more. As it goes way down, we deduct it from the price. So.
Okay, I'm glad. So then we won't have to worry about our citizens worrying about an increase because of an increase in fuel. That will be taken care of through this proposed contract in reference to all of the statistics you just gave me.
Yes, ma'am. In wards 2 through 8, ultimately it's absorbed into the base rate. Now, the citizens pay for that because we're paying for it out of the sales tax collection.
Correct.
In Ward 1, slightly different, we're proposing that, again, that they be allowed to adjust their rate. And I am sure or confident that those other companies that are currently serving Ward 1, in a situation where their operational costs go way up, as a company, they must decide whether they're going to pass that on to the customers or continue to absorb it. And, you know, I guess they do different things, I'm not sure, but it's all part of their business.
Okay. I was also interested in your detailed explanation about the equipment, which would be one of the criteria. Now, how are you going to know if the specifications are met with what you're requiring? Or is this going to be taken from the information that's submitted to us?
Mostly
in reference to having dependable vehicles and the machines that we need to get this work done.
In the RFP, there's a list of probably, I'm going to guess because they're alphabetical order, about 20 questions that we'll ask them to write narratives about those questions. One of those questions is, tell me all of your equipment. Actually, tell me the equipment that you have on hand now, and I want a snapshot of what you've had over the past 5 years so that I can get a sense for the kind of equipment you've been using, what you're using. So we're not going to necessarily, they may propose to use a different type of equipment, but we're going to ask them, when you've been doing business, what equipment have you been using? So we'll get good information on that. We're going to ask them for their fleet management policies. That'll tell us how often they service their equipment, how often they clean it, how often do they trade in their equipment. Some people have a real fast turnover rate on their equipment because they don't want to absorb the maintenance costs. Others have maintenance shops, and they're going to fix their equipment and drag out the life of that equipment. So we're going to request a lot of information based on the equipment that they have and the equipment that they propose to have to service your contract so that we can study what we think they're going to do in our contract.
And the requirements that we're requiring is based on comparable parishes with the population similar to ours?
Yes, ma'am. We've looked at a number of RFPs and contracts and the different things.
Particularly your base rate and your cost of your cans.
Well, that'll be proposed by the contractor. So that's how a lot of people do it. But we'll see what they propose as their rates.
Okay, that's my last question. However, I would like to see another member added to your review panel. Since you have 6, I would like to see an uneven number. Would make me feel better in case you meet up with a situation where you're deadlocked and need to be comparable with what you're doing. That is just a suggestion. I always like uneven numbers when I'm dealing with something like this. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, Ms. Griffin. Very, very good. Did you have some more questions?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Hassan?
Thank you, ma'am. Brian, I'm not going to belabor this too much. It just your statement that we were only talking about 10, a little over 10% that have that third can and beyond. Problem is that's 3,000 residents. That's a significant number as far as I'm concerned. And when you take out 10 to 15% that's going to be charged extra, and saying that the burden is on the rest, you also got to remember the fact that there's 10 to 15% that don't even fill the can up every 2 weeks. That's something that, in my mind, I'd almost like to hear some feedback from a couple of the companies here, because we're saying this, it's going to pick up everyone's garbage, and I think we're putting a little bit too much emphasis on the additional can, because whether the can is there or not, just like Dennis was just saying, whether the can's there or not, you've got the additional garbage. So it would make sense to me that whether it's a 90 or 96 gallon cart would hold three 30-gallon bags. It seems like it would be more efficient to dump the cart than dump 3 bags. It'd be a lot cleaner, less litter problems. I mean, they should be basing their bid on time, labor, fuel, and disposal. And that's based on the average household garbage. So it's going to take that, that high user and low user into account when they bid on it. I think we're putting like I said, I don't know if Ms. Trimmy would approve of that. If somebody would like to comment on that, from their industry, would they rather pick up 3 to 5 bags or 1 can?
I'm just trying to provide whatever information that we came across too. We wanted to make sure whatever we put in here that we thought through why we're doing it, obviously, and also how does this compare to other places. The answer is it is literally all over the map.
Yeah.
I wish there were more consistency around the state, but there's not. Every combination of who pays or what do they pick up, but when you try to look for something, again, I don't know, there may be one exception, but none of them said an unlimited amount. And matter of fact, it's common to have the second can, if you get one, be a completely total rate, meaning if it's, let's just pick a number, $16 a household, and you want a second can, you pay another $16 a month. So
how do we plan to bill that? And will the can be missed until it's paid for?
Under the way we're proposing it, we would envision that being handled between the contractor and the resident, and it would be a direct bill with them, and they would handle it as if they were doing it on their own, but they would just pay that contractor since they're coming down the road anyway. And and you're right, there are people who get it, but we were very intent in this process of not cutting back service. And to Mr. Scott's question was, these are sort of addressing that. The idea is certainly not to reduce that service, and I want to make it clear that this is simply to say, look, if we start putting in there, well, you have to use a manned crew, for example, if it might put some companies that don't even do that across the country at a disadvantage. It may not if you do it the other way. That's a flexible item, and for whatever it's worth, I don't think you're going to meet a more detailed couple of guys than me and Alan and Teresa. I'll throw her in. But it's certainly a good point. It's a debatable point, and so we can look at that. The 3 can thing, you mentioned the 2,500. If you don't count Moss Bluff, we estimate it's about 2,500. That's also 2,500 more cans that those people would have to pick up, and so that multiplied over every week over the course of a year, it is different. So it is more. It's not like
the point is they're still filling up the can. What happens to the garbage that's going in that 3rd can?
But they have no incentive to even think about it, is what I'm saying. And all we're saying is, if you go, you mentioned the word average. We don't average 3 cans. That's what I heard you say. And the average is not 3 cans. If that's something that is a key thing for the jurors,
you said 10% have 3 cans.
Our best estimate.
2,500 to 3,000 residents.
Correct.
That we're going to now ask to pay an additional charge for their additional garbage. They voted on a tax. I just have an issue with that. I have one other thing. Are we including anything on the drop-off sites, servicing the drop-off sites? Could we get a better price if we did include that in the same RFP?
You know, I've kicked that around a lot of times, and I think at the end of the day, I've decided to leave it out. I think we're going to get a better price somewhere down the line on those sites, because I think I'm going to have to bid the service out at those sites. I think it'll be a real attractive service to a number of the guys here in the room, because it's going to be high volume, same location, easy to get into. So I think it's a good service. I think we'll get our bang for our buck there. We have a current contract parish-wide for our facilities for the bigger containers. It may roll up into that, renewing that contract.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hassan. Mr. Scott?
You know, I don't know about having anybody come up and speak right now, but what would be the advantage or disadvantage to, by now, I think most of these contractors know if they're going to get involved in this. Would there be a problem with them sending letters to the parish right now, kind of letting you know how they would like to perform the service, how they think they could, you know, kind of giving you who they are and what they plan on doing? That way we'd at least have an idea of what we could look at that's being proposed from their end of it to maybe kind of build this RFP around. As long, you know, I'm not saying every last detail, but hey, they kind of know who they are by now. And let them shoot it out that, hey, we're willing to do manned only, unmanned. I mean, is that a possibility?
Brian, I'll take a shot. I would discourage that. I mean, that's the RFP process, Mr. Scott. That's what we're going to do. We have been, as your staff, trying to canvass as many of those RFPs state as we can get our hands on. And so a lot of what you're seeing is ours from whoever wrote ours 18 years ago did a really good job, and we've melted into it a lot of the new things that we found, not all of them, because some communities are pretty aggressive with these contracts, and some aren't. So we've added to that. To go through this other cycle, I just think it might be counterproductive, and we're knocking on the door of our timelines now, and I think we can stick with our pattern. We've done it a number of times. We're going to have ample time to ask for more information if we need it. And I think we're going to have some pretty thick proposals. We're going to have a lot of information. They're going to get all the time they need to tell us how they're going to do it.
I would say, Dennis, we can easily, between now and the next meeting, on that issue, the mechanical arm versus totally manned crew, just do a quick poll and see what they normally do. I think we got that information and it was mixed. And so we felt like if we try to find something too much, we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot, but we'll find out. That's easy enough.
I'll go back to the millions, and my opinion is, good hard work never hurt anybody, and you can sure do it a lot more efficient than some of these machines and stuff. So I'm going to be a proponent of manned. That's, you know, I would like to see that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Mr. Scott, Ms. Griffin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just do have, I would encourage also for us to follow the proposed schedule that we had, particularly when dealing with the proposals. Because when we do RFP, when we do the request for the proposal, you're going to have so many details. You would just about have to do it, Dennis, because we went through this before, even with Acadian Ambulance and also this process. It's more detailed like this than what I'm not really interested in what they're proposing to do for us. I'm interested in them filling out the proposal that we're giving them, and so we could see what they're capable of doing. And then after that, if we want them to do it, that would be the best thing for the people of the parish. Thank you, ma'am.
Well stated, Mr. Collins.
Yes, ma'am. Ellen, I think we should look at giving each household 2 cans per household, and if there's a third can that have to be purchased by the household, that they get it from that contractor that have that job. not just going to Sears and pick up a can, because we need to stay in the line with the contract of the can that they're using.
I think that is the intent of our contract at this point. Mr. Collins, I agree with you. On the extra can, at this point, let me clarify that statement. At this point, the providing 2 cans per household is not how it's worded. Again, that's the sort of things that you guys as the committee we're going to have to ultimately decide.
Thank you. Mr.
Yeah,
Scott?
I was about to get you to clarify that. So the proposal as it is right now, they will provide every household with 2 cans, 1 can.
Yes.
You would buy the second can, and, okay. I just
Again,
clarify.
Brian made some comments earlier on that subject on if there's any, I guess we'll call it grandfather type cans. If there's a transition, we have to kind of always do this with both hats on. If there's, we'll have to deal with that. Again, that's why Brian said it many times, the transition of these contracts probably be a fun time. That those 120 and 90 days will be a lot of details to be worked out.
All righty, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for clearing that, Paul. I mean, I guess since I'm the chairman, I don't get to ask any questions, but that is a good question. Well, you're supposed to just run the meeting, period. Be a figurehead and run the meeting. So y'all have asked really good questions, and I think that our staff has some questions in their mind now of the way that the committee feels that we hope that y'all look at very strongly the feelings of this committee and hopefully put some of the concerns that that this committee had when you bring forward the RFP on the 31st.
Matter of fact, Ms. Trimmy, I appreciate you saying that. We really want to encourage all of the committee members and all the jurors who we will give a copy of this presentation to and email a copy of the video streaming on the web that'll be put out there so that all of you are up to speed, and the next 2 weeks are really important for feedback so that we can incorporate any changes. And if for some reason it's just still a lot to discuss and we can build in like one more committee meeting, we need to do it right. We don't have to do a final approval on them, but we didn't want to put it back too far either, because it is a long process.
Well, Brian, we know that our staff is taking this extremely serious. We want you to know that our committee is taking this extremely serious, because we're not only talking, for ourselves. We're talking for the people. We're talking for the people here, and also trying to represent the rest of our jurors. And thank goodness they can go right to you directly and give you their feelings. So hopefully some of the same feelings that came from here tonight is some of the thoughts that our colleagues were having. So, and if there's any others other than that, then you know where to go. Do I have any other questions? If not, I move for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.